Greetings, digital world, and welcome back to yet another episode of Spliced In Later. I hope you all are keeping well out there, wherever you are in the world, keeping safe, keeping happy, all the general positivities that one would hope to express to another individual person. I noticed I picked up a couple of new subscribers over the last week on YouTube, so if you're one of those people, welcome. It does not happen very often. You may not stick around for very long, but for the brief moment that you're here, until you realize that I don't talk about a specific thing every single week, glad to have you with us. I hope you stick around. Otherwise, hello to my very specific regular group of listeners. No new movie review this week. I would say that there probably won't be that many reviews of brand new movie stuff going forward for the next couple of months, because either there's just stuff that I'm just not particularly interested in seeing, or the stuff that I am interested in seeing, thanks to the opposite end of the world that we live here in Australia, some of our releases are being put at a later date. Movies that should be coming out in July are coming out in September. Possibly more to push towards our spring and summer, because at the moment it is winter down here and it is mighty cold. It is freezing. I sit here recording this and I actually can't feel my toes. I could turn the heater on, but life is expensive at the moment, as I'm sure we can all agree, so I'd rather just freeze in silence. Well, not in silence, because I'm talking, but I'd rather just freeze for a little bit, rather than pay that extra few bucks to keep warm. And if you're one of those people who keep asking me when I'm going to review Elvis, don't hold your breath. I do really want to see Elvis, and I hope that I do get a chance to see it. But it's, as I said before, I don't have a huge interest in Elvis, and the more people push me to go and see it, the more I kind of push back and make an effort to not see it. But also I think I've had a couple of rather bad cinema experiences the last few times I've gone to the movies, whether it's the cinema itself just not working, or the people that go to see the movies at the same time as me and just forget how to be quiet. So if Elvis is as good as everyone is saying, I kind of want to wait until I can just get it myself and watch it in the sanctity of my own living room, where no one's going to talk to me, no strangers, nothing's hopefully going to break, and I can appreciate the movie as a whole. Because I'm pretty sure once I see it, I'll probably love it. It's a Baz Luhrmann production. Tom Hanks is in it. You know, it's got a lot of stuff in there that will work for me personally, but we just haven't got around to it yet, and I don't think we're going to get to it for a little bit. But today we're doing a classic, just standard episode then, and we are finally talking about Indiana Jones and the movies that he's in. Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, Last Crusade, and any other movies that may or may not exist. And I've been promising this for a few weeks, so if you've been going, when is he going to talk about Indiana Jones? You're in luck. And if you're thinking, why is he talking about Indiana Jones? I don't know. I got a little playlist on my YouTube at the moment, which is notching up when I talk about movies that are specifically on my 100 movies bucket list poster that I got many, many years ago. And if you're a regular listener on this show, you will know that my greatest achievement has been that I watched every single movie on there. Not just watch, but do in fact own on hard copy media. So I got to scratch off every little scratch and sniff on there and see the little symbol for each movie that was on there. So we've talked about things like The Dark Knight, 12 Angry Men, Jurassic Park, some other movies that are escaping me at this point. But Raiders of the Lost Ark is one of those movies. So it fits into a criteria for a certain series of things that I'm doing. Obviously, it pops up in the media quite often, but there is an Indiana Jones 5 coming out next year, which Harrison Ford is starring in. So I guess it fits into a few different categories here and there. But at the end of the day, it's just something that I can talk about, that I won't get too carried away with talking about, so it'll be a nice, simple enough episode. I will talk about each movie a little bit, but this is more a broad overview of the character of Indiana Jones and the franchise as a whole, its past, its present, and its future. So it's not a 100% Raiders of the Lost Ark review, but we will be addressing all of that as we go forward. So I'm pretty sure most of you know who Indiana Jones is, right? Indiana Jones is kind of one of the most iconic characters in movie pop culture, definitely one of the most iconic franchises. even though it doesn't have very many movies in its repertoire, the character itself and the stories and the adventure have stuck with a lot of people to a point where there's still books being written about him, Lego video games, theme park rides. To this day, I'm confused because when I go to Disneyland, there's the Indiana Jones ride there, which is one of the greatest rides there. I'm glad that it hasn't been shut down or boxed up or whatever. But it doesn't make a lot of sense because Indiana Jones is not a property of Disney. At least, I don't know, it could be. By the time that I release this episode, Disney might have acquired it, as they are acquiring everything. I'm sure in the future they will have, so this could be out of date by that point. But I'm pretty sure it's not. I'm pretty sure it's a 20th Century Fox franchise. Oh, no, it can't be, because then Disney would own it. So maybe Disney does own Indiana Jones now. But case in point, they didn't own it when this ride first came out. I guess, maybe. Who knows at this point? But, so even if you have not seen the movies, if you've gone to Disneyland, you've probably gone on that ride. So you are familiar of the concept, at the very least, of old Indiana Jones running away from that boulder. If you haven't seen them, you're missing out. It's definitely a great franchise. They're really great movies, obviously. That's why Raiders of the Lost Ark is on most top 100 movie lists of all time, or 1001 movies you must watch before you die. If you're unclear of what the franchise is, Indiana Jones is a character played by Harrison Ford in a very charming way. He's got a great name, Indiana Jones. His actual name is Henry Jones Jr. But he is, by day, he's basically a mild-mannered professor at a university who teaches about archaeological artifacts and all of that stuff. But somehow, all across the world, he's basically believed to be the greatest mind when it comes to this stuff. He knows about all of it. He knows all the history. So he's often approached by higher up, often with nefarious intentions, but we don't know that in the beginning when they're often approached, if he will be willing to go and track down specific artifacts. And normally they are religious in nature, but not always. The two movies out of the first three involve the Ark of the Covenant and the Holy Grail. So there's a religious element to it. But it's not specifically Christianity. There's a few other different things. Temple of Doom, there's a lot of stuff in there as well that's separate to that. Kingdom of the Crystal Skull has its own thing going on. But there's always a MacGuffin of sorts, whether it's the Ark or the Grail or a literal Temple of Doom. Indy always ends up on the trail or caught up in certain circumstances. His goals are always, they're the less bad of the situation. Indiana Jones as a character is quite interesting. So he's played by Harrison Ford, and it's the Harrison Ford that everybody loves, which is the reluctant hero, the anti-hero, if you will. Indiana Jones is not a superhero. He's not designed to be somebody who goes out to go looking for the Ark of the Covenant because he wants to stop the Nazis from using it to destroy the world. His goals are always selfish in nature. They're just less selfish than everybody else. He always wants the artifacts to be taken from their natural resting places because he wants them to be preserved in museums. It's one of his catchphrases. It belongs in a museum. He wants to take these things and put them safe and on display. But he doesn't mind manipulating people and betraying people to get that thing, to achieve his goals. The problem is when it's stacked up against literal Nazis and cults and demon worshippers. He is the lesser of two evils at that point. But if you analyze him as a character and as a person, the way he's talked to people, I mean, the infamous relationship he has with Marion Ravenwood in the first movie, you can tell he's not really a great guy. His intentions are good in the best possible sense, but they're not great. It's not Indiana Jones would save the world. You watch those videos on YouTube where people take the Avengers Endgame scene where all the Avengers show up to help Cap fight Thanos, but they go even bigger. So they show the X-Men showing up, and then Dumbledore, and then Optimus Prime, and Godzilla. These videos often include Indiana Jones as well, but Indy wouldn't show up. What could Indy do? He's good with a whip, I suppose, but Indy would not answer that call. He would hit the snooze button unless Thanos was standing on the Ark of the Covenant. Then he'd go, all right, I'll go, but just because I want to do that. I'll help out, but really, that's my goal there. which means the movies themselves are interesting in that they're callbacks to a different time, to pulp style adventure films, where a bunch of different parties go on a quest or a race, if you will, to retrieve a certain artifact. And there's always that one character that you do want to win over everybody else, but there's a lot of dark betrayals and curses and puzzles and things to solve that are quite lethally destructive for everybody else around them. So naturally, Indy has that look with the hat, with the fedora, with his whip, with his outfit that harkens back to that adventurer, that tomb plunderer of sorts. I mean, he is a raider looking for a lost ark. The movies are set in the past too, so when you watch them, even when they were made, so Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in 1978, maybe 1979, just before the 80s, I'm pretty sure. But it's set during the World War II, or at least right before World War II, before the Nazis really kicked off World War II. So it's a period piece type of drama as well, meaning the people that he interacts with, the world around him, is obviously of an ancient period. Not an ancient period, I should say, but it's an older time period of sorts. They're always full of a lot of fun, a lot of action, a lot of smarky evil characters or funny sidekicks to Indiana Jones. And more often than not, the villains are outdone by their own nefarious intentions than by Indiana Jones standing up to them. Often he's just running from them, or he's captured by them, or he's attempting to escape the same thing that they're escaping, and they are taken down by their own hubris. So there's no final confrontation. Indiana Jones doesn't stand up for the little guy to save the world. He's just trying to get out of there in one piece. But Indy is such a lovable, charming person that you want to root for, mainly done by Harrison Ford's portrayal of the character. In the same way that Han Solo is a lovable rogue, you get the same vibes and feel from Indiana Jones. And the movies themselves are enjoyable for the adventure that Indy is on per se and how he reacts to it, rather than I want to see Indiana Jones's next adventure because I'm interested to see what he will do next. It's more, what will he get caught up in next that he has to find his way out of. If that makes any sort of sense, I hope so. I know I'm rambling a bit there, but it is an intriguing character, Indiana Jones, and his movies are interesting, especially the way people have reacted to them over the years. Raiders of the Lost Ark is definitively the best of the movies. However, it's not my favorite. My favorite is Last Crusade. There are people, before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out, the general consensus was that Temple of Doom was the weakest of the three. But I honestly like Temple of Doom a little bit more than Raiders of the Lost Ark. It all comes down to your personal flavors, the things that appeal to you, your tastes for movies. I was discussing this recently with my family about how I like sequels to movies often more. Mainly, I mean, let's be fair, if it's a good sequel. I don't just like all sequels. I like a sequel that's good, but the reason I prefer them to a movie that's also good is because sequels don't have to worry about establishing characters and points. They can just jump right in with a story they want to tell. Shrek's great. Shrek 2, even better because you don't have to define the characters of Shrek, Donkey, and Fiona. You just get right to it. Rocky 2, I like more than Rocky because we know exactly who Rocky Balboa and Apollo Creed are. Let's just get to them fighting. Plenty other movies like that too. Beverly Hills Cop over Beverly Hills Cop for me because Axel is already friends with the Beverly Hills Police Department, so they can just get right to their banter as they solve the mystery. So if you disagree with anything I say about what Indiana Jones movies are better than others, that is to be expected. I'm going to say some things on here that are probably controversial, but everybody has their own opinions, their own things that work for them and things that don't. So let's not get upset. Let's not be like every TikTok person at the moment who didn't enjoy Thor: Love and Thunder, so has decided that it's ruined the MCU franchise for them as a whole. Let's not be children who complain when their parents spend all day making them a spaghetti meal and then they don't like the spaghetti meal, so they run around to all their neighbors to tell them that the spaghetti meal was bad, and by association, all spaghetti meals are bad. Sorry, I went on a tangent about something that's not even relevant to what we're talking about here. Anyway, if you haven't seen Raiders of the Lost Ark, simple movie. Basically, it's about a bunch of different people from different parties who know that the Ark of the Covenant, they've essentially found a map to find it. The legendary Ark that carried the 10 Commandments brought down by Moses when they were wandering the deserts. Indiana Jones obviously wants to get it before the Nazis do. He wants to put it in a museum. The Nazis are working off the belief from the Bible that any army that carries the Ark of the Covenant before them is unbeatable. So naturally, someone like Hitler is pretty keen to get that. What follows is a series of events as they each try to outthink each other. Indy's always either one step ahead of the Nazis or he's figuring out puzzles before them. He is also reunited with a former love of his, potentially underage former lover, which we won't get into here. Has a fun sidekick in John Rhys Davies' Sala, a crippling fear of snakes, and his longtime rival Renee Belloc is the one that's joined up with the Nazis. So it's Jones versus Belloc to get this thing before everybody else does. It's a lot of fun. It's quite dark in certain places. There's some really violent deaths here and some violent ends to particular characters and that fall into booby traps and all of that stuff on. But it is a lot of fun, especially if you haven't seen it before. I would like to remember what it was like when I saw Raiders for the first time and was able to go, but I'm pretty sure, as with a lot of classic films I saw when I was a kid, I had already been told in some way or another how the movie would end. Raiders is great. It's a great start to the franchise, great introduction to the character of Indiana Jones, and it's a lot of fun. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. I want to address really quickly, obviously, the very nefarious thing that's gone down in recent years, not even controversial, I would say, but just interesting to note, is the observation that if Indiana Jones makes no impact on the Raiders of the Lost Ark plot at all, if you remove his character from the movie entirely, the Nazis will still initiate a chain of events that will lead to their destruction by the end of the movie. That's me being vague because you haven't seen the film. I don't want to say what happens or how they get to that point. That's probably true. That is interesting, but it backs what I said about the movies not being about Indiana Jones. He's a player in the movie, and it's pretty funny that he's not even really an influential player. But at the same time, you could argue that there are certain bits in different places which slightly influence how they get to certain points. You just have to use your imagination. You know, if Indy wasn't in the film and didn't steal the golden tiki head at the start of the movie, perhaps the Nazis would have died, or Belloc would have died getting that and not be able to help the Nazis during the movie. If he had not been involved, would Marion Ravenwood have been violently killed by the Nazis or burned down in her inn? Most likely. If he hadn't got involved, maybe the Nazis would have never found the Ark of the Covenant and would have allowed to keep Naziing. And any outcome that allows for Nazis to stay alive and keep doing what they're doing is bad. So at the end of the day, it comes down to whether it ruins the movie for you or not. I don't think it ruins the movie for me. It's a fun thing to note and a fun thing to discuss, but it's not something that goes, oh no, why do I even bother watching the movie? At least not for me. After that, obviously, the movie was quite popular, made a lot of money. Everyone liked Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones. So they come back for Temple of Doom, which people have felt is the weaker, but I like the tone of it because it strikes a nice balance between really silly, goofy humor and horribly dark, traumatizing imagery and association with what's going on. Basically, it's a prequel to Raiders, and it shows Indiana Jones and his sidekick Short Round, played by Lee Kay. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got the name wrong, but the fellow who was just in Everything Everywhere All at Once, and a really annoying romantic interest, Willie. They, through a series of events, accidentally find themselves embroiled in a terrible death cult in the as mentioned Temple of Doom, where Mola Ram, I believe, is the bad guy of this film, is keeping kids as slaves in the tombs of his temple, and is using magic of sorts, evil magic, to be able to pull hearts out of people and burn them. Dark stuff, but it's balanced by a really good camaraderie sort of relationship between Indiana Jones and Short Round. Willie, as I said, is very annoying because she screams a lot. She's the weakest part of the movie by far. But again, a lot of the movie is just getting to appreciate Indiana Jones just going, oh my God, how did I get here? Why am I here? I don't want to be here. I just want to leave. but his curiosity keeps pulling him further and further into the shenanigans of the temple. And even though he's a bit of a bastard, has that reluctance thing where when he sees that kids are being kept as slaves, he does go, all right, well, I have to release them. I have to get them out one way or another. Again, looking at that film, he doesn't really defeat Mola Ram. Situations devolve into a place where Mola Ram ends up pretty much killing himself, but the journey there is a lot of fun. I personally can rewatch Temple of Doom more than Raiders of the Lost Ark, I think. As I said, though, it might just be the sequel thing that I have. Indy's already an established character, so I'm ready to just get right behind him and get into it. And I've always loved Short Round. I don't know if he's racially insensitive, the way he is portrayed in the movie. That's a whole other discussion that I'm absolutely in no way qualified to talk about. But as a character, as a potential adopted son of Indy, he works really well for the majority of the film. But my favorite has always been Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, which is the third film in the franchise, and it really brings together a lot of the characters that have been established in the first two, specifically Indy's friends, his associated family and sidekicks, Sulla, Marcus Brody, and then brings in Sean Connery, the man himself, as Henry Jones Sr., Indy's father, which means you already start the film off on a really good antagonistic father-son dynamic that works really well in most movies if you can get that right, if you can tell the story well, especially with the chemistry between Sean Connery and Harrison Ford is great. Sean Connery is having a lot of fun in the film as well. You bring back the Nazis. The Nazis obviously skip Temple of Doom because it's a prequel, but they're back wholeheartedly in this one because now everybody's after the Holy Grail and eternal life. And that might also be a little bit of biasm for me because Holy Grail comes from King Arthur myths and legends, and I've always loved the King Arthur story and the King Arthur world. The Holy Grail is an essential part of that. Last Crusade is definitely the lightest of the three films. It's the only one that has a PG rating here in Australia, where the others have M. But I don't know, the final acts of this film where people acquire the Holy Grail and some suffer the consequences of choosing poorly make for some pretty upsetting imagery, to a point where as a young child it did keep me up at night from nightmares. But there's a lot of cool action set pieces, a lot of good humor and comedy, some betrayals, some twists and turns, puzzles to solve as well to get to the Holy Grail or to find the map to get to the Holy Grail. Horrible, horrible, horrible deaths for Nazi characters, which are all great. And there's just a feeling of fun and levity in this film that you don't get from the others, which it makes me feel warm and safe when I watch the film. A side note as well, there's an opening action scene in the movie, which is a flashback to Indy as a kid when he's played by River Phoenix. And I like seeing River Phoenix in things because his eventual death in real life sucked. So he obviously, you watch this stuff and you watch Stand By Me and you can tell he was a talented young actor who had a pretty bright future ahead of him. Unfortunately, things didn't work out for him, but it's a great opening opening sequence of events, so that if you've never watched an Indiana Jones film before Last Crusade, like I had never done, I still knew exactly who Indiana Jones was as a character, as a person, his relationship with his father, from that opening action scene. So Last Crusade is the best of the bunch, in my opinion. What's that? There are no more movies? Yeah, nice try. Then in 2008, Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. Now, from what I know, from very common knowledge in the media pop culture world, Indiana Jones fans do not like the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. They were very disappointed by it. They don't like what it added to the franchise or Indy as a character, to an extent where I know one particular friend of mine who just refuses to acknowledge that the movie exists. Which, as I just mentioned earlier at the start of this, is probably the right way to do it. If you really don't like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, if acknowledging its existence makes you unable to appreciate the other Indiana Jones films and you're an Indiana Jones fan, the best way to approach it is just to not address Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, to ignore its existence and just appreciate what's there. If anyone else in the pop culture world, pop culture fans, were able to do that, if they're able to pull out the things they didn't like about a franchise and just focus on the stuff they did, rather than focusing so much on the thing that makes them angry or annoyed to a point where they can't appreciate anything else in it, you're only hurting yourself there. So that's probably the best way to do it. Everybody who doesn't like the new Star Wars films, or is struggling with Phase 4 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, or believes Star Trek has taken a wrong turn with Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard, that's totally fine. You cannot like things. That's completely allowed. But don't let that hatred for what has come fill you up with such a negative attitude to the rest of the franchise that you enjoy so much, that not only are you no longer unable to appreciate it and enjoy it, but you have to ruin it for everybody else around you. If you didn't like Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and then you went and said, well, because of that, all the other Indiana Jones films suck, and you shouldn't like those movies anymore because this movie exists, and this movie by association ruins everything else. It's difficult to do, but I think that's the only way moving forward, because that's what Hollywood is doing. Hollywood is going to revive everything. It is going to milk every IP brand dry until there's nothing left, which means every franchise is doomed. They will have that point where something is made that just doesn't jibe with fans and is just a complete fail. However, when that day eventually comes, don't let it ruin your love for what came before. Be able to disassociate it like my friend does with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. That being said, after all that, I don't mind Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I think it's pretty good. I know I'm in the minority when I say that. I enjoyed it in the cinemas. I've enjoyed it on rewatch. I like the concept of the movie taking place much later in time. Obviously, Harrison Ford is older, so they embrace the idea of Indiana Jones as an older person. He's getting slower, he's getting tireder, introducing his potential son into the film as well, reuniting with Marion, but him still having to go on those crazy adventures, this time to follow clues from Area 51, which eventually showcases an alien spacecraft. That's silly, but I don't believe in religion, so it's just as silly to me them finding an alien spacecraft as it is to find an actual still alive Knight of the Round Table guarding the Holy Grail, or that there are actual commandments inside the Ark of the Covenant with lethal consequences. To me, it's all the same. I believe the road to get to that point is just the same as any other Indiana Jones film. The action escapades following the puzzles, the way, I believe it's Russians in this one, the way the Russians are killed off by man-eating fire ants is pretty great. Harrison Ford, in my opinion, hasn't lost a step. He's grumpy. He's grumpy old Harrison Ford, but to be fair, Indiana Jones was always grumpy, so it works for me. The one thing, obviously, that everyone focuses on is that Indiana Jones hides in a lead-lined fridge to survive a nuclear bomb. And that fridge is flung away and he survives. The term nuke the fridge comes from that, which is the new Jump the Shark reference. That's dumb. I do agree with that, but it's so dumb that I kind of like it. We've already established in my Minions review that I like dumb shit. I laughed at the word cabbage. I laughed at goats screaming in Thor: Love and Thunder. That's just me, my brain. I just obviously don't have enough brain cells to go, that's dumb and I shouldn't laugh at that. Instead, I go, that's so dumb that I like it. So yeah, I don't have that much to say about Kingdom of the Crystal Skull other than I just kind of defend it. I don't think it deserves the reputation that it needs to be disassociated because it's terrible. I think it definitely has its lows, but it has its highs in certain bits as well, which I think are pretty great. To wrap up, Indiana Jones 5 is coming, which is, I'm apprehensive about that. I've just spent ages defending Indiana Jones, but I will say that I don't think there should be an Indiana Jones 5. I know why there's an Indiana Jones 5. As I just said, IP brands. But if we are going in that direction, I would prefer that it were a reboot of sorts and we cast somebody else as Indiana Jones. Instead, we have a very old Harrison Ford filming this movie, and as of recording this, the production on that movie has stopped 2 to 3 times because Harrison Ford has hurt himself so badly filming the movie that they've had to take a break. I believe he's broken his foot, he's cracked his ribs, he's fallen down, like he's not doing very well. And I don't think there is a demand, a need for a 5th Indiana Jones film, so much so that Harrison Ford has to put his life in jeopardy, I think. Especially when people were so upset and so disappointed and let down by Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I don't want Harrison Ford to put all this effort and risk his life for this one just for everybody to go, it wasn't great. I'm going to pretend it doesn't exist. That sucks. That's not worth Harrison Ford's life. I'm quite happy for them to continue on, recast the character. Doesn't even have to be a prequel. Just have somebody else in the role. It's fine. It's okay. We don't need to de-age every actor because Hollywood believes that the human race just can't see somebody else as a different character. Kathleen Kennedy, if you're listening, Solo did not fail because Alden Ehrenreich was Han Solo. Solo failed because it was just a bad movie. Anyway, I know I said my title for this episode was A Warrior for Indiana Jones 5, which might have established that I was going to talk about it more, but it's really just an epilogue to this whole thing. I'm worried about it. Not that it's going to be bad in any sense of the word. I quite enjoyed Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. I'm worried that Harrison Ford won't make it to the end of this movie in one piece in real life, that he's going to hurt himself filming this movie, and all for the sake of a sequel to a film that nobody particularly enjoyed in 2008, and possibly just to get the same sort of anger and attitude and response to it. It's worrying for me on many different levels. That said, when it's released, I'll be there on day one to see it, as I am for a lot of these things. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. This episode has run long. I guess that I had more to talk about Indiana Jones than I thought, but I think we've addressed quite a few different topics here on this episode today, whether it's Indiana Jones or franchises or fan reactions to things or Harrison Ford as a living being. But I hope at least somewhere in this episode you found something that you enjoyed listening to. If not, oh well, too late now. Episode's over. I'll be back next week. We will be reviewing and summing up Ms. Marvel, the newest MCU Disney Plus show that will wrap this week, and I will give myself the weekend to think about the series as a whole, and we'll be talking about it then. A sneak peek, it's going to be very positive. Unless this last episode is just completely shits the bed, it's the best MCU show by far, despite what all the review bombing and toxic fan base things are going on at the moment who'll tell you that it's the worst thing ever. They're wrong, and I'm looking forward to explaining that next week when I talk about it. Another side point, you cannot watch 10 minutes of a product and then say it's terrible as a whole. People say Ms. Marvel is terrible. Oh yeah, what did you think of it? I only watched 5 minutes. Well, okay, I guess the first 5 minutes were terrible. What about the rest of it? You haven't seen it. You don't know. Anyway, I'm getting off track. This is for next week to talk about. Let's wrap it up. Thank you all for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. And as always, I love and appreciate you all for joining in with me as I rabbit on about whatever I've decided to talk about. It means a lot to me, especially to these subscribers that may even now have decided they want to go. And that's fair enough. But until next week, I love and appreciate you all as always. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.